Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to Talking Point. My name is Faraz Patel. We'd like to thank you, the viewer, for staying with us here on Hilaal TV, DSTV channel 347. How much of a change, impact, a sense of diplomatic changes has Israel's attack on the Hamas negotiating team in Doha created? Well, if you listen to the UN Security Council and the global condemnation that has occurred with regards to this, quite a massive one. But what does this mean in terms of Israel's impunity as it not only continues its genocide in Gaza, the ethnic cleansing that is occurring in the occupied West Bank, but they also continue to bomb Yemen, Lebanon, and Syria? Of course, we saw a few weeks ago them bombing the Yemeni leadership. And this brings to question as to the facilitation that the United States of America is playing in this, given it remains its strongest ally in all of this. Let me welcome my panel discussion to go ahead and have this discussion. Joining us from Durban, no stranger to us here at Hilaal TV, Ayesha Kajee, who is an independent international relations expert, and also no stranger to us here at Hilaal, Ofer Neimann, who is from Boycott, from within the BDS movement within Jerusalem. Ayesha, I'm going to start off with you. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and jazakallah so much for joining us. Ayesha, just when we thought Israel could not pull off something like this on a sovereign country, weren't we proven wrong?
Yes, well, Faraz, wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to you and your listeners. I think my initial reaction when I was called for comment was really one of disbelief. I literally asked the producer who called me, I said, "Are you serious? Has this really happened?" Literally, 5 minutes after it had happened. And I was in disbelief, but then I quickly collected myself because I thought to myself, well, if Israel has shown so much impunity thus far, why not go and strike Qatar? Why not go and strike or apparently strike Hamas leadership in Doha? Because, in the last few weeks alone, while Israel has continued its genocide, its Holocaust in Gaza, and its ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, it has also struck Yemen, it has struck Syria, it has struck Lebanon, and now, of course, Qatar. And it's just this week alone twice struck or attempted to strike a ship on the Tunisian Sumud flotilla. So it's struck in Tunisian territorial waters. So why should an attack on Qatari sovereignty, an attack on Qatar's land space really surprise us? Yeah. I'm really coming from that viewpoint. I think Israel has now reached a point where it is acting with such impunity because it has not been sanctioned in the past, other than, lots of talk shops, lots of condemnation, including by the UN, including by other Gulf countries, including by, players in the international arena ranging from North America to Asia. All there has been thus far, apart from the Houthis in Yemen, has been talk. And so Israel has not paid any price for the violence it has inflicted on numerous countries and the citizens thereof.
Ofer, I want to come to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Ofer, we've had so many discussions with regards to this impunity of Israel. But when you listen to the leadership, I mean, this is Benjamin Netanyahu quoting, "Any country that harbors terrorists, we will attack you." I mean, it's an open threat, isn't it?
Yes, I was somewhat surprised seeing Israel bombing Qatar, because Qatar is quite powerful, and it's a Western ally, also an ally of the United States. There's a huge, at least one U.S. military base on Qatari soil. So on top of that, we also heard the Israeli ambassador to the U.S. actually threatening that, saying if we didn't hit them this time, we're going to hit them next time. So indeed, staggering level of impunity here.
Ayesha, when we talk about what the reaction would have been from the Qatari leadership, and when this attack happened, I had a discussion with Naeem Jinnah, and prior to that, I had a discussion with an SANDF or retired SANDF general. And he said that if you take international law into account, there can be a strike, there can be a attack on another country if they are attacked. Now, I don't think Qatar would go as far as doing that, but just that alone suggests that surely Qatar can do something. But we know that's not going to happen because that Al Udeid air base in the which is, of course, a United States air base, is going to go ahead and be quite the determining factor or the drawing line in all of this.
Absolutely. It's the largest airbase in the region. It hosts a large contingent of U.S. military personnel. Qatar has hosted it for a fair degree of time now, and it's unlikely that that relationship is going to change. Also, bear in mind, Faraz, that while, yes, in international law terms, a retaliation may well be expected and even considered reasonable, that will be unlikely to happen so long as the United States is the puppeteer pulling Qatar's strings. Let me be honest here and say that all the Gulf states who are close allies of the U.S., they may have imagined they were partners, they were really allies of the U.S. But what the strike has shown is that they are instead vassal states. They're essentially slave states of the United States and Israel because they are unable to retaliate in this instance without the consent of the U.S. And the consent will not be forthcoming, even though the U.S. has paid lip service, has said that Mr. Trump is very upset by what has happened. He's not thrilled by it, according to what he put on his own Truth Social. At the end of the day, neither the U.S. nor Qatar will take direct military action against Israel, even though, as you have said, others have said to you that in international humanitarian law, in international legal terms, a retaliation could well be viewed as a reasonable action, but it won't happen.
Ofer, I want to go to, obviously, what was happening, but these were statements by France and the United States. And I want to touch on this part because it's quite a lengthy statement. Council members underscored the importance of de-escalation and expressed their solidarity with Qatar. They underlined their support for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Qatar in line with the principles of the UN Charter. I want to touch on the word de-escalation. It's quite clear that Israel has no intention of de-escalating, not just when it comes to the genocide in Gaza and what we're seeing happening in the occupied West Bank, but when it comes to Yemen, when it comes to Lebanon, and when it comes to Syria. This word de-escalation, if we are taking this from a neutral perspective, it seems that Israel has no intention of doing that.
So I agree. Israel has no intention, or Netanyahu at least has no intention of de-escalating because he is stuck. He has reached a dead end in Gaza. Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza. That's the main fact about Gaza. But from a military perspective, Israeli ground forces are pretty much depleted. Lots of Israeli soldiers have been killed. Many more have been injured and traumatized. And Netanyahu is now in a position where he feels that he needs to take desperate measures to try and force the Palestinian resistance to surrender. So I think we should see this bombing in Qatar in this context of Netanyahu being both out of control, Israel being out of control and using its military might, but also being in a desperate situation here.
Ayesha, I want to look at a breakdown, obviously, the response from the Qatari leadership, especially the Amir and the Prime Minister, very diplomatic, and they have been so, especially in these last few years when they've been asked to play this mediatory role. Of course, many would forget that they were actually playing a mediatory role in the earlier months of the Russia-Ukraine war. So this is what Qatar is. Its role as a diplomatic player sometimes is understated. When listening to the comments from the leadership, it was quite mature, but it also sent a stark warning, didn't it, to Israel that, listen, we are not going to allow an attack like this on our land, on the sovereignty, in an area where there are schools and other facilities which are being used by civilian populations of that region.
Well, for us, firstly, I would say I would liken Qatar in many ways to post-apartheid South Africa in international diplomatic terms. It punches above its weight in diplomatic circles, particularly when it comes to attempts at peacemaking. So we saw Qatar play a vital role in the Afghanistan crisis. We saw Qatar play a very necessary role in the early era of the Ukraine-Russia conflict. We've seen Qatar repeatedly and consistently play a very necessary and essential role in trying to broker peace in Palestine as well, including during this latest Gaza genocide and the ethnic cleansing in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. However, we must also remember that Qatar, as a sovereign state, will not want to lose face in having now been struck by Israel. So the rhetoric that comes out is going to be strong. We've seen that kind of rhetoric come out not only from Qatar, but from other Gulf states. And it does seem to be drawing those Gulf states together diplomatically, if in no other way. Apparently, they've scheduled a meeting to discuss a response to this. On the other side of that coin, though, we see, as I said, the beholden nature of the allyship, if you want to call it that, the relationship between Qatar and the US, and even the other Gulf states and the US, dating back to the early Abraham Accords, etc., between Saudi Arabia and Israel, between the UAE and Israel, etc. So we see this vassal state nature. And to assume that they're going to do anything major in practical military terms to censure Israel is very, very unlikely. And Israel knows this because the Israeli ambassador to the United States said, well, we missed, I'm paraphrasing now, we missed the Hamas officials this time. We'll get them next time. So in other words, not ruling out the possibility of another strike on Qatar, while on the other hand, the US president has come out and apparently assured Qatar that it will never happen again. Whether his assurance in the light of the Israeli ambassador's comments is worth anything remains to be seen. Remember also that a day after the Qatari attack, Israel had the nous, the guts, the chutzpah, if you will, to then go out and attack Yemen again and kill many dozens of people. So it really looks like Israel is on a slightly, maybe very insane path right now, and has begun or has totally bought into its own gung-ho, macho, vision of itself as invincible. The belief in Israel's invincibility among the IDF and the members of the Israeli government, and even members of the Israeli media right now, is at an all-time high, I would think.
Yeah. Ofer, I've got 2 minutes for you. If Israel's plan was to go ahead and shake up these Gulf states or the Middle East, that may have failed because even Israel's closest ally in the Middle East, the United Arab Emirates, if we are to believe the reports that are coming, is about to recall its ambassador or summon its ambassador. So in that case, this is a bit of a diplomatic fall for Tel Aviv, isn't it?
Yeah, so I agree that it's unlikely that Qatar or any coalition of Gulf states, Arab states, will respond militarily to Israel's illegal attack. However, they do have the political, diplomatic, and economic means to exert international pressure and to punish Israel. And this also percolates into U.S. politics and European politics. These Gulf states have a lot of clout in the Western world. They have a lot of money. They have invested or are about to invest huge sums in the U.S. in related to Trump, the Trump's family's own interests. So they can do a lot of damage if they do decide to take action. And perhaps, I mean, we're seeing in recent days some escalation, positive escalation, in terms of European willingness to apply sanctions, even in fields which seem unrelated to to Qatar, such as the Eurovision Song Contest. Perhaps some people in South Africa are aware of that. We're seeing more willingness among European nations to push for the suspension of Israel. And I think we're going to see more positive pressure for sanctions on Israel as a result of Israel's madness in Qatar this week.
After the break, we're going to be still talking on this attack that had occurred in Qatar, but we're going to be shifting to a quote that was made by Benjamin Netanyahu at a Male Adunim event where he said there will be no Palestinian state. My conversation with Ayesha and Ofer continues after this break. Welcome back to Talking Point. Ofer, I want to come to you. This event, Male Adunim, that took place in East Jerusalem. From my understanding, and maybe you'd be able to speak more on this, these words of Benjamin Netanyahu, where he says, we are not going to even discuss the possibility of a two-state solution, number one. This land belongs to us. If ever there was a chance of any discussions of this occupation expanding, these quotes right over here speaks to it, doesn't it, Ofer?
Yeah, so there are several interesting points here. Just before Israel bombed Qatar, we read in the newspapers that actually through pressure by the United Arab Emirates, is an Israeli plan, or Minister Bezalel Smotrich's plan, to push for the annexation of at least most of the West Bank, was shelved for at least for a period. So we saw some effective pressure by the United Arab Emirates. On the other hand, Israel insists on this specific huge construction plan, which basically disconnects the northern part of the West Bank from the southern part of the West Bank. And Israel, under Netanyahu, has been very consistent in saying no to a Palestinian state. Now, with the Trump administration and the fanatics running business there, including Mike Huckabee, an evangelical Christian Zionist who is the U.S. ambassador to Israel, so quite a few senior U.S. officials are just saying out loud that there will be no Palestinian state from their own perspective. This puts pressure on other Western countries, especially the European Union, that are absolutely committed to the idea of the Palestinian state, even if this in itself is a kind of charade. And this creates a rift between the US and other parts of the Western world, and also perhaps paves the way for more sanctions on Israel.
Ayesha, the quotes, we are going to fulfill our promise that there will be no Palestinian state. This place belongs to us. We are going to double the city's population. Of course, he's talking specifically on the occupied West Bank. Now, any neutral would say, well, this is the talk from the right. This is the talk of Bezalel Smotrich. This is the talk of Itamar Ben-Gvir. But if your own prime minister is saying this right over here, this is a rubber stamp approval from the head of the Israeli executive, which means this excuse of the right wing influencing decisions when it comes to the occupied territories is absolutely nonsensical.
Absolutely. We've seen over the past 2 years concerted land grabs by settlers in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem. We've seen no reaction from the Israeli state to halt that in any way. In fact, we've seen support for that, particularly from people like Smotrich and Ben Gvir, but also silence from Mr. Netanyahu. So it doesn't surprise me at all that he's talking about no Palestinian state, no two-state or indeed one-state solution, because this has been the plan all along. Very soon after October 7th, 2023, he was using rhetoric about Amalek,
Yes,
and about defeating and annihilating Amalek. And I think this is the end game of that. We're certainly in the final stages of it in Gaza, and I think they're going to attempt at least the same in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem. Their vision, remember, is not only for what is currently Palestine; it also incorporates Syria, Yemen, parts of Saudi Arabia itself, this whole greater Israel project. And really, it's starting to seem to me as though they're insane enough to attempt it, quite frankly.
Well,
and that they will have at least some support for it from the US. So in international political terms, yes, Ofer is correct in saying that there's going to be a distance between the EU and the US, or North America, if this continues. But again, in concrete practical terms, is anybody going to do anything to stop Israel? Yes, there are economic sanctions. Yes, there are cultural and diplomatic sanctions that can be used as a tool. International music events, international sporting events, trade ties, etc., all important. But will they stop Israel? Will they actually halt what is currently happening? I'm sad to say that from my perspective, I don't think so.
Ofer, here's the thing when it comes to the genocide in Gaza. So Tuesday's attack practically takes away any chance of there going back to this negotiating table. Qatar's role as a mediator starts to dwindle even more. I want to go to what is currently happening within the Israeli public, because you and I have spoken a lot. There's one side that says, well, we want to end the war so we can get our hostages back, and maybe the Israeli occupation forces can continue this genocidal war in Gaza. And then there's a small handful of Israelis like yourself, Ofer, who are saying, well, this cannot continue. Israel needs to be held full accountable, and there needs to be the sanctions that are coming from within. Then you get a mother of the hostage, the mother of a captive, I beg your pardon, going ahead and criticizing Netanyahu on air. I want to get your take on what the Israeli perspective is right now, given what we've seen after Tuesday, and how this plays out in terms of any negotiating to end this genocide. Ofer.
So I think it's important to look at what liberal Zionists, the centrists and the so-called leftist Zionists are saying. They were definitely less gung-ho and militaristic in their response to Israel's attack on Qatar than they were 3 months ago during Israel's war of aggression on Iran. And to me, the response at that time was shocking. I saw, well-educated liberal folks who actually was at least supporting a ceasefire in Gaza, saying, yeah, it was absolutely the right decision to bomb Iran. This time, not so much. A few of the liberal Zionist leaders, the ones who are less bright, I would say, did sort of embrace at least the Israeli military and congratulate the Israeli military on this great success. But these people, Israeli elites, are worried. They understand that this shuts the door on negotiations towards bringing the Israeli captives back. And most of them would like to at least get the Israeli soldiers out of Gaza, even if they're racist and pro-apartheid in their own sophisticated way. And this creates a crisis for them. But then again, if you look at the opposition, what they do out on the street, it's not enough. It's not enough. Not enough people. The actions are not drastic in terms of calling for refusal and organizing refusal to serve in the Israeli military. Not enough is being done. People will complain that they are tired of the war. Of course, most of them will not call it a genocide. So for Netanyahu, at least from an internal domestic perspective, it seems that he has enough power to go on, that he's still not facing significant opposition.
Who's not tired, Ayesha, is the Israeli government, because if you listen to the words of Israel Katz and you listen to the words of the far right, they want to make sure that this ethnic cleansing in Gaza is completed. Herein lies the problem in all of this, is that even though US President Donald Trump has always said, I want to get the hostages out, as early as yesterday he mentioned the very same words. Well, it's difficult to get these hostages out, because if Israel's attack in Doha is anything to go by, you'd find it very difficult for this Hamas negotiating team, I beg your pardon, to go ahead and say, well, can we really sit in the same table with the US, with Israel, and try and find a way to end the continuous slaughter that, as we speak right now, Ayesha, is continuing at a level we have not seen before?
Absolutely. I don't believe there's any intention of ending, and I will not call it an ethnic cleansing. It's far beyond that. It's a genocide. It's a Holocaust in Gaza. There's no intention to end it. If Hamas were to release the remaining captives, hostages, call them what you will, I believe there are thousands of hostages sitting in Israeli jails as well. Those are also hostages.
Yes.
But if they were to release the Israeli hostages right now, they would have no negotiating lever whatsoever. And then the Israeli military would act with even more impunity than it currently does, because it would not face that pushback from the families of hostages and those concerned about Israeli hostages around the world, including Mr. Trump. That's one thing. For us, another two things I want to quickly bring up. Has it struck you that Mr. Trump and Mr. Netanyahu, and his attacks on Qatar, his attacks on Yemen, his attacks on Syria, his attacks on Iran, are always very, very conveniently timed for himself and his own domestic woes within Israel? He was due to appear in court, in an Israeli court in Tel Aviv, and he, in fact, did appear on Wednesday, but the matter was again postponed. So he's using strikes on other countries, and indeed strikes on Gaza and ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, etc., as tools to ensure his own political longevity. That's the one thing. The second thing is, in terms of that strike on Qatar, are you aware, and this is a report that I've actually drawn from and had translated from an Israeli media organization. Apparently, I haven't fact-checked this, I haven't been able to yet, but apparently that strike in Qatar would have been successful had the negotiators not left, the Qatari negotiators not, the Hamas negotiators not left the negotiating table to perform their salah. So that is quite interesting in and of itself, that Israeli news media is reporting that because Hamas went to pray, they escaped total annihilation, total destruction, call it what you will. That's interesting, as I think, in and of itself. And I think also that the role of Qatar going forward, the role of Qatar as a dependable ally or a dependable peace broker, if not ally, of both Hamas and the current Israeli state in Tel Aviv, has been blurred, bloodied. The trust that was once there is certainly not going to be there. And again, this is a modus operandi of the Netanyahu government. They attacked Iran on the eve of what some said was going to be an agreement of a nuclear deal between the US and Iran. Just last week, Mr. Trump said they were close to some kind of a deal with Hamas. And because of that, Israel has just decided to scupper it. So every time there's a diplomatic breakthrough, or there appears to be progress forward, Israel lays it to waste. Every time Mr. Netanyahu appears to be in some kind of domestic trouble with regard to his corruption trials, etc., Israel goes and attacks somebody to focus attention elsewhere.
Ofer, there's something interesting that Ayesha has brought up. Every time Netanyahu, and the viewers need to remember, he still needs to face the courts in Israel with regards to his corruption trial. And if you listen to, or if you read the press in Israel, these are quite serious charges that have been brought to him. He knows how to do it, doesn't he, Ofer? And even though he's got this ICC arrest warrant to him, even though he is one of the greatest genocidal prime ministers in Israel's history, this is a man who knows how to find a way to try and make sure that this trial does not go deeper than he would want it to be and fears it to be. Talk to us about that, Ofer, because if you look at what has happened this week, it seems quite evident that he's going to escape going to these courts in Israel.
Well, I mean, there's only so much time he can buy. The indictments against him in Israel are quite serious. They seem to be well-founded. He has been waging this war of delegitimization on what he calls, ironically, the deep state. If anything, he is the deep state. The liberal institutions, such as the courts. And he can buy some time, but the trial proceeds, and worse than that, from his own perspective, according to pretty much all the polls, and this has been consistent in the past 2 years, he is going to lose the next elections. So he is desperate to find some way out. Perhaps the war on Iran was one way, one attempt to sort of come out of the whole thing as this hero. Eventually, it has not been a success. Perhaps Israel will try again. Some people are saying that it is likely. So Netanyahu is trying all kinds of tricks, but in the grand scheme of things, he is still quite stuck, unable to achieve Israeli victory in Gaza, not even reach an agreement with third-party states to, quote-unquote, get rid of the Palestinians and send them to these states. Still facing, in spite of his war on the ICC and on Karim Khan, still facing the arrest warrants and perhaps growing willingness among European governments to actually hold him accountable, at least not stand in the way of the ICC now. And he is likely to lose the next elections.
After the break, we're going to be dividing the conversation into two different topics. We're going to be speaking about whether this is a wake-up for the rest of the Middle Eastern leadership. And of course, what is the role of the United States as Trump has continued to push for these Abrahamic Accords? But if anything is to go by Tuesday's attack, to the Middle Eastern nations, to the Gulf nations, still feel the Abrahamic Accords has any meaningful aspect to it? The conversation concludes after this break. Welcome back to Talking Point. Ayesha, I want to come to you and boycotts. The call continues to grow louder and louder because this potentially could be the only solution to actually hold Israel accountable for this ethnic cleansing, this Holocaust, this genocide that is occurring, not only in Gaza, but also in the occupied West Bank. Ayesha, you were, of course, an anti-apartheid activist, and you saw what it did to the apartheid National Party government of South Africa. Talk to us about that, and is there still that option that is open to hold the Israeli regime accountable?
Yes, the option is there. I'm a huge supporter of BDS, and I do think it played a huge role in our own struggle against apartheid. The cultural isolation, the sporting boycotts, the boycotts of South African companies, etc., the divestment from South Africa, all that played a huge role. But I do think the two situations are different. While I applaud the success of the boycotts against big corporations, with regard to the Gaza genocide, the closing down of Elbit Systems plant in the UK, etc. At the same time, to compare it to South Africa is too simplistic because in South Africa, the National Party government, the apartheid state, was dependent upon black labor. In Israel, particularly over the last decade and a half, the dependence on Palestinian labor has decreased dramatically. Israel has been importing blue collar workers from other countries that are sympathetic to it, particularly one among them, Mr. Modi's India, which shares this kind of Hindutva vision of ethno-nationalism, very similar to the Jewish supremacist, Zionist supremacist vision. So that dependence on labor from within is not present as a lever as it was in South Africa. And this must be taken into account in any kind of a calculation of the success or lack thereof of a BDS movement, and as a push to bring Israel to real practical negotiations, particularly around whether it's a one-state solution or a two-state solution, but some kind of state for the Palestinian people. That lever is not actually present to the degree it was in South Africa. And it was a big lever in South Africa because the major economic backbones of the South African economy at the stage, gold mining, etc., coal mining, etc., were dependent on that black labor. And they're not, the Israeli state is not dependent on Palestinian labor to anything near the same extent. So we must be careful of making false equivalences, particularly in very, very simplistic terms.
Ofer, you, of course, are part of Boycott from Within. Talk to us about a potential success this could have from within Israel.
So once again, this is mostly about the Israeli elites, a small minority of Israelis who will basically keep everything together. Without them, everything is going to collapse. And these people, perhaps similar to the fact that quite a few white South Africans at the time had, I believe, the option of moving quite easily to the UK or to Australia, Canada. Most of these Israelis have foreign passports, especially European passports, and are considering leaving, if only for the future of their children. I know people who have done so. Some of them are ideologically against apartheid and genocide. Some of them simply care about the future of their children. And these elites are now facing a problem. So it's true that Israel is not facing the problem of such dependence on Palestinian labor, similar to what South Africa had. However, Israel is very susceptible to disruption of various chains around globalization. Israel depends on vast interaction with the outside world for its economy. So I think that in comparison to South Africa 40 years ago, it's easier to disrupt Israel's economy internationally. And Israeli elites, for example, high-tech entrepreneurs, are seeing that more and more people in the West are unwilling to do business with their companies. This means that they're either losing revenues or having to register their companies elsewhere, or perhaps move along with their families, just move elsewhere in order to keep their business running. And this means huge financial losses for Israel. And this comes on top of loss of cultural prestige regarding all of these cultural BDS measures. So I would say that there is growing and significant pressure, including financial economic pressure on the Israeli elites. And we're seeing more and more reports about it in the Israeli press. People worried, they're saying people will not return our calls now in Europe, in the West, people are ignoring us. What future does our company have?
Ayesha, I want to go to the Middle Eastern leadership. Okay, so we're seeing a global condemnation from that part of the world against Israel. And yet, of course, there's still these Abrahamic Accords, especially a very strong ally of Israel, the United Arab Emirates, still maintains quite close ties with Israel. When you listen to the rhetoric of this Greater Israel project, has it sunk into these Middle Eastern leaders that this Greater Israel project is slowly, some would say at a rapid pace, gaining momentum? Are they still in a slumber with regards to this?
I needed to unmute there.
Sure.
Very definitely so. I think they are largely sleeping, but even those who aren't don't really care because the elites in these Gulf countries, in these Middle East countries, including in Saudi Arabia, they really care only for themselves, not for their people. They're largely authoritarian regimes. They buy, in fact, Ofer was talking about, Israeli tech companies and the entrepreneurs there. They buy surveillance equipment, military surveillance equipment to surveil their own citizens from Israeli companies very often. If you read Anthony Loewenstein's book, The Palestine Laboratory, you will see that. So they basically support the Israeli economy in a variety of ways. And they're unlikely to stop doing that. Again, for them, like those, entrepreneurs, those elites in Israel, they always have the option of going elsewhere. Should that greater Israel project ever start to gain more momentum and expand into their own countries, etc., they have the option of going to the United States, where they have tons of assets stored. They have the option of going to Europe. They basically have options. Their citizens do not. And this is the major thing. If the citizens of those countries are able to push back sufficiently against their governments and demand accountability and demand certainly action on Palestine, on issues such as the Holocaust in Gaza and the ethnic cleansing in East Jerusalem and the West Bank, then the greater the momentum of that pushback, the more seriously those regimes, albeit being authoritarian regimes, are going to have to take their own citizens.
Ofer, from within Israel, are there citizens or organizations that are backing the Israeli government's plan of a greater Israel project? Because the Amalekite, this notion of the Amalekite, does not only extend to the Palestinian peoples. You hear rhetorics that are also coming where there are certain sections of the Israeli society that wants to see conquest of Arab lands. Talk to us about that and whether this is something that certain parts of the Israeli community are actually buying into this idea, which is being preached by not just the far right, but the entirely Israeli government as a whole.
So the smaller Greater Israel project, which involves control over the land between the river and the sea, the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, you could say that a broad range within the Zionist spectrum has supported it, including the so-called liberals, the Labor Party, historically, even people like David Ben-Gurion, who was the architect of the Nakba, the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, in 1948. Most, at least on the surface, most Israeli centrist liberals are not fond, definitely not fond of the Greater Israel rhetoric, and think that this creates a problem for Israel internationally. And of course, most of them now realize that Israel, the Israeli military, the ground forces are worn out, and Israel has no way of actually occupying large swaths of land beyond what is the territory between the river and the sea. Although right now we have to know that Israel is controlling parts of southern Syria right now, even beyond the occupied Golan Heights, and even small parts of Lebanon. But overall, the Israeli military right now is worn out. The religious fanatics who are quite powerful in Israel have this vision definitely of the Greater Israel, the smaller Greater Israel project between the river and the sea. And some of them are also asserting that Israel has some sort of historic right to territories, even parts of Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, all the way up to the rivers in Iraq, I think the Tigris of the Euphrates River. I think that this grand, mad Greater Israel vision is not on the agenda right now, even from the perspective of an Israeli right-wing government, because Israel right now, and we have to keep this in mind, Israel is not powerful. Israel is desperate. I mean, it's powerful. It's capable of carrying out a genocide. It's capable of bombing Qatar. But we have to look at the weaknesses. And a lot of the crazy rhetoric and the crazy actions are coming from a place of despair. Israel, at least the right wing here, Netanyahu, realizing that they are in a dead end. But regarding the Greater Israel project between the river and the sea, this is, of course, on the agenda, and Israel is trying to annex land, grab land in the West Bank. The risk of ethnic cleansing and even genocide in the West Bank is real, and this is something that we have to keep in mind.
Okay, guys, we've got about 8 minutes. I need to get this discussion point in. Ayesha, the United States of America, Donald Trump in his first term pushed hard for the Abrahamic Accords. Many Middle Eastern nations, Gulf nations accepted it. The one that he's trying to achieve quite hard is Saudi Arabia. But there are discussions, there are these murmurings that what we saw in Qatar on Tuesday could have only have had the rubber stamp from Washington, from the Pentagon. Donald Trump says he's not happy about the attack. But when you listen to Catherine Levitt, the White House press secretary, she said the same thing, the first part of what Trump said, but said any attempts to annihilate Hamas must be welcome. The United States of America, as long as there is this thumbs up from them for Israel to do what they want to do, Tel Aviv will do it.
Absolutely. And it appears that there is no Rubicon, there is no red line that Israel would cross that would urge the Trump administration to basically say, that's it, no more support for you. We actually, condemn this and we're withdrawing support. Because literally they've crossed red line after red line and they've not been held accountable for it. So in terms of the Abrahamic Accords, right now those appear to be dead in the water. Certainly a deal with Saudi Arabia has moved further afield. But then on the other hand, a deal with India, for example, currently being negotiated by Mr. Smotrich, appears to be close to fruition.
Yeah.
So, while Israel is perhaps distancing some of its potential and current allies, it is also bringing others into its fold. So make no mistake, Mr. Netanyahu and his government are quite shrewd here, and they will have support from Narendra Modi, the current PM of India. They will have support from other ethno-nationalists, white supremacists in Europe and Eastern Europe and elsewhere. They will have support from people who share that kind of crude, racist apartheid mentality. And they will make economic and other mutually beneficial agreements with them to the extent that they might think they don't need the Abraham Accords. They don't need the immediate neighborhood as much. On the issue of whether the US knew or didn't know about the strike, given that the Al Udeid Air Base is the largest American air base in the country, it's highly unlikely that the military at least had no forewarning of this. Mr. Trump said he didn't hear it from Mr. Netanyahu or the IOF, but he did hear it from his own military, but too late. He warned Qatar about 10 minutes after the strikes began. That's what the intel says. But to assume that neither the US military in the United States, in the continental United States, nor the military based in Al Udeid or elsewhere in the region had no foreknowledge of this attack, I find that very, very hard to believe.
Ofer, many analysts are saying that Netanyahu is the ultimate manipulator when it comes to Donald Trump. Has Netanyahu manipulated Trump, not just now, but ever since Trump has taken over his second term of the United States presidency in January?
Yeah, and I think we have to keep in mind that Trump is also a weak president. He's not a strong president. And he's up against the Israel lobby, especially the Israel lobby within the Republican Party, mostly non-Jews, mostly evangelical Christian Zionists. So I don't think that Trump will exert a lot of pressure on Israel. But then again, it seems that he did exert some pressure towards the partial deal that we had earlier this winter when he came into office, just to start with a sort of clean slate, and he pushed for a partial deal. Will he do anything beyond that? I'm not sure. And perhaps, and this is it's quite horrifying, perhaps he's just saying to himself, why should I mess with Netanyahu, the manipulator? Just, let him drive Israel into a dead end. But, this means more genocide. Perhaps this is what he's saying. I don't want to argue and mess with Netanyahu. Let him dig his own hole.
Ofer, I'm going to give you and Ayesha just 1 minute for closing remarks. Where to now from here? I'll start with you, Ofer.
So I think that what we have seen in the past 2 years, citizens of the world coming together to build a movement, direct action, BDS, lobbying, naming and shaming complicit Western politicians, media, institutions, companies. I think this is working. Of course, it's way too slow considering the horrible genocide in Gaza, but we are making a difference, and we're seeing right now things that seemed inconceivable in terms of Palestine solidarity achievements that are now either taking place or coming up on the agenda. So I think that this can give us some hope that we can change things from the grassroots level, and even change our own governments through elections, and make sure that the next wave of elected officials, wherever we are people who understand the Palestinian cause and can help us hold Israel and other complicit actors accountable for the genocide and for crimes against humanity, and ultimately to decolonize this place, to end Zionist settler colonialism here, and force the emergence of a democracy.
Ayesha, your 1 minute of closing remarks. Very similar question to Ofer.
On the negative side first, I believe that the Holocaust in Gaza will continue, unfortunately, and very sadly. I do think Israel is in its final stages of that. And I do think that the US and some other nations are complicit, because not only do they have this vision of a Gaza Riviera, as Mr. Trump said, but more than that, there's oil and gas in Gaza that is very, very valuable, not only to the US, not only to Israel, but also to some European nations. On the positive side, I echo Ofer's thoughts. We are gaining momentum. We will continue to gain momentum. The degree of support for Palestine globally is at unprecedented levels if we go back just 5 years. So I think we need to continue the momentum. We need to continue that push. We do need to elect officials who share our vision for a free Palestine. We do need to hold officials and big business to account and continue to do that. And more than ever, we need to not tire of this action. We need to keep the momentum going. We need to keep all eyes on Gaza. We need to keep eyes on the flotilla, the Samud flotilla currently on its way to Gaza, etc. And we need to keep commenting, sharing, educating, letting people know that Palestine has mass support around the world and will continue to be supported no matter what.
Ayesha, Ofer, absolute pleasure having both of you on here. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
That's Ayesha Kajee, independent. That's Ayesha Kajee, independent international relations expert, coming to us from Durban, and Ofer Neimann, who is from Boycott from Within, coming to us from Jerusalem. That's all we have for you here on Talking Point from myself, Faraz Patel, and the rest of the team in Johannesburg. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.